Hey everyone, welcome back. Really glad you're here for this one. Quick thing before we dive in. If you end up enjoying today's video, it would mean a lot if you could drop a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people. Also, I love hearing from you guys. So make sure to drop a comment below with your thoughts, or just let me know where you're watching from. All right, enough talking. Let's get into it. Kong Min hadn't slept properly in 4 years. The insomnia had started the night he'd ordered his first execution as head of the family. A quick, clean kill that should have meant nothing in the grand scheme of violence he'd inherited. But something about crossing that particular line had rewired his brain. Now he spent his nights moving through his River Oaks mansion like a ghost, checking security feeds, responding to messages from Seoul, standing at windows watching Houston's skyline blur in the humidity. The singing started on a Tuesday morning at 4:17 a.m. He'd been in his office reviewing shipping manifests when he heard it. A woman's voice drifting up from the kitchen, raw and unpolished, singing something that sounded like it belonged in a church basement. He froze with his pen hovering over a page of numbers that represented $3 million in laundered construction contracts. The voice wasn't trying to be beautiful. It just was, in the way that honest things are beautiful without meaning to be. Kong Min moved to the hallway and stood at the top of the stairs, listening. His new live-in chef was singing while she worked. He could hear the percussion of her movements underneath the melody. The thunk of a knife on a cutting board, the scrape of a pan across the stove, the rush of water from the tap. She was singing like she was alone in the world, like the house belonged to her and not to a man whose name made people nervous at charity galas. He walked down the stairs in his socks, keeping to the edges where the old wood didn't creak, and stopped in the shadows of the kitchen doorway. She had her back to him, broad-shouldered in a gray t-shirt and dark jeans, her natural hair pulled into a loose knot that was already coming undone. She was prepping vegetables with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in kitchens, her hands moving in time with whatever song was living in her head now. Something slower, jazzier, sad in a way that suggested the sadness had made peace with itself. Aid Bimpogan laid. 46 years old, according to the background check his people had run. Widow. No children. Previously worked as a private chef for 3 separate Houston families before applying to his position. No debt, no criminal record, no drama. The references had described her as professional, unflappable, and makes the best jollof rice in Texas, and yes, I'm including my own mother in that assessment. What the background check hadn't mentioned was the singing. Kong Min stood there for 53 minutes. He knew because he'd glanced at his watch when he first stopped in the doorway, and when he finally forced himself to walk back upstairs, it was 10 minutes past 6. 53 minutes of listening to a woman sing to herself while she worked, and something in his chest had unknotted for the first time in 4 years. He slept for 3 hours. Dreamless, deep, the kind of sleep he'd forgotten was possible. It became a routine he didn't examine too closely. Every morning at 4:15, he'd be somewhere on the 2nd floor when the singing started. Every morning, he'd drift down to that doorway and stand in the shadows like a creep, listening to Aid Bimp work her way through what seemed to be an endless catalog of soul music, gospel standards, and songs he didn't recognize but felt like they'd been written specifically to be sung in empty kitchens at dawn. She never saw him. Or if she did, she never let on. By the end of the 2nd week, his second-in-command Jin-soo was looking at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're sleeping," Jin-soo said, standing in Kong Min's office with a tablet full of doc schedules and a deeply confused expression. "Like, actually sleeping. I called you at 2 a.m. about the Long Beach situation, and you didn't answer. I was asleep. You're never asleep at 2 a.m. You're never asleep at any a.m. Jin-soo narrowed his eyes. "What changed?" "Nothing changed. Hyung, you look like a human person instead of a vampire." "Something changed." Kong Min didn't answer. He wasn't about to explain that he'd started sleeping because his chef sang in the kitchen before sunrise, and somehow that made the violence in his head quiet down long enough for his body to remember how to rest. On the 17th morning, she switched songs mid-verse, from something smooth and Motown into His Eye is on the Sparrow. And Kong Min felt something crack open in his chest. His mother had played that song. Before everything. Before his father had dragged the family into the kind of business that made normal life impossible. He must have made a sound, a sharp inhale, maybe, or the whisper of his shoulder brushing the doorframe. Because Aid Bimp turned around mid-lyric, wooden spoon in hand, and looked directly at him. They stared at each other. Kong Min felt like he'd been caught doing something far more incriminating than listening to music. His mind raced through explanations, excuses, ways to frame this that didn't make him sound completely unhinged. Aid Bimp looked at him for 3 long seconds, wooden spoon still raised like a conductor's baton. Then she burst out laughing, a full-belly laugh that doubled her over the counter, utterly delighted. "Oh my God," she wheezed, laughing so hard she had to set the spoon down. "Oh my God, you look like I caught you stealing from the cookie jar. How long have you been standing there?" Kong Min's face was burning. "I didn't want to interrupt. Baby, you've been creeping around your own house like the world's most anxious burglar for how long now?" 2 weeks. She was still grinning, wiping her eyes. "I heard you the 3rd morning. These floors creak something awful when you hit that spot near the breakfast nook." He had no idea what to say to that. "You want coffee?" she asked, already turning back to the stove. "Because if you're gonna lurk, you might as well sit down and lurk properly. I made banana bread yesterday. It's in the container by the microwave." Kong Min stood frozen in the doorway like a man who'd forgotten how conversations worked. Aid Bimp glanced over her shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "I'm not going to stop singing just because you finally got caught, if that's what you're worried about. Sit down. Keep me company since you're already up." And because he genuinely couldn't think of what else to do, Kong Min walked into his own kitchen and sat down at the counter like a guest in his own house. Aid Bimp slid a mug of coffee across the counter to him. Black, no sugar, which meant she'd been paying attention to how he took it even though they'd barely exchanged 10 words since she'd started working for him 3 weeks ago. She went back to the stove where she was doing something complicated with eggs and peppers, still humming under her breath. Kong Min wrapped his hands around the mug and tried to figure out what the protocol was for this situation. He'd negotiated million-dollar deals with cartel representatives. He'd stared down federal prosecutors without blinking. But sitting in his own kitchen at 4:30 in the morning while his chef hummed Aretha Franklin and made breakfast felt more surreal than anything he'd done in the last decade. "So," Aid Bimp said, not looking at him, "you gonna tell me why you've been haunting your own hallway like a sad ghost, or are we gonna pretend this is normal boss behavior?" "I have insomnia." "Uh-huh. And my singing helps." She said it casual, like she was asking about the weather, but there was something knowing in her voice that made him feel transparent. "Yes." She nodded, cracking eggs into a pan with one hand. "My husband used to say I sang like I was trying to wake up heaven and put it back to sleep at the same time. Couldn't hold a note if you paid me, but I got feeling, you know? That's what matters." It was the first time she'd mentioned a husband. Kong Min's security team had noted widowed in their report, but no details beyond that. "Your husband," he said carefully. "Emmanuel. He died 3 years ago. Cancer, the long, ugly kind where you get to say goodbye about 400 times before it finally sticks." She said it matter of fact, the way someone talks about old weather. "He liked when I sang while I cooked. Said it made the food taste better," which was probably a lie, but it was a nice lie, so I didn't argue. She plated the eggs, perfectly fluffy, scattered with green peppers and onions, and set them in front of him with a fork. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper breakfast in years." "I usually don't eat breakfast." "Well, now you do. House rules. If you're gonna sit in my kitchen at stupid o'clock in the morning, you're gonna eat." She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter across from him, watching him with the kind of direct eye contact that most people couldn't maintain around him for more than 10 seconds. Kong Min took a bite. The eggs were perfect, creamy, seasoned just right, with a hint of something he couldn't identify that made everything taste more alive. "This is good. I know it is. I've been cooking for 30 years. I'd be worried if it wasn't." She grinned at him, completely unbothered by his reputation or his silence or the fact that he was her employer. "You always this talkative, or is this special treatment?" "I'm not good at small talk." "Lucky for you, I'm excellent at it. Covers both of us." She sipped her coffee. "So what is it you actually do, Kong-min? And before you give me some line about import-export or real estate development, know that I've worked for 3 different wealthy families in this city, and I can smell a cover story from a mile away." He stared at her. Most people didn't ask. The ones who knew didn't want confirmation, and the ones who didn't know were smart enough not to dig. "You don't want to know. If I didn't want to know, I wouldn't have asked. But also," she held up a hand, "I don't actually need to know. I'm not asking because I'm scared or because I need reassurance that you're a good person or whatever. I'm asking because you're sitting in my kitchen looking like a man who hasn't relaxed in his entire life, and I'm nosy. Your kitchen. I cook in it 5 days a week. That makes it mine. You just pay the mortgage." She said it with such complete confidence that he almost laughed. His phone buzzed against the counter. He glanced at it. Jin-soo, texting about a shipment delay at the port of Houston. 30 containers of electronics that weren't actually electronics. He typed back a response with one hand while eating with the other. "See that right there?" Adebimp said, pointing at him with her mug. "That's a work emergency at 4:45 a.m., which means either you run a very intense bakery operation or you're into some illegal stuff. I'm guessing illegal stuff." Kong-min set his phone down and looked at her properly. She wasn't scared, wasn't even particularly interested, just stating facts like she was commenting on the humidity. "Does that bother you?" "Does what bother me?" "That you're probably a criminal." She shrugged. "Baby, I spent 2 years fighting insurance companies while my husband died. I physically screamed at a claims adjuster in a Starbucks parking lot because they denied his 4th round of treatment. I've seen worse than whatever you do. I don't think you have. Maybe not. But I've seen what matters, and whatever you do for money isn't even in the top 10 of things I have energy to worry about." She rinsed her mug in the sink. "You treat your staff well. You pay on time. You haven't been creepy or weird to me even once. That's more than I can say for the last family I worked for, and that man was a pediatric surgeon." Kong-min didn't know what to do with that. With her. She was standing in his kitchen at dawn, completely unafraid, treating his violence like it was weather, something that existed outside while she made eggs. "I should let you work," he said, standing up. "You should let yourself relax, but we both know that's not happening." She started pulling out ingredients for what looked like bread dough. "You can stay if you want. Or go. Or keep lurking in hallways like a weirdo. I'm making cinnamon rolls in about an hour if you want to come back and haunt the doorway some more." "I wasn't lurking. You were absolutely lurking. World's most expensive lurker." She was grinning again, that same delighted expression from when she'd caught him earlier. "But it's fine. It's nice having company, even if the company doesn't talk much." His phone buzzed again. Jin-soo triple texting now. The shipment problem was escalating. "I need to handle something," he said. "Go handle it. I'll be here, singing songs and making bread like the world's most unbothered chef." She paused, then added, "Same time tomorrow?" It took him a second to realize she was asking if he'd come back, if he wanted this to be a routine instead of a one-time thing. "Yes," he said. "Good. Bring your lurking skills. They need work." She was already humming again, hands moving through flour and sugar, completely at ease. Kong-min walked out of the kitchen feeling something he hadn't felt in years, like maybe his house was less empty than he'd thought. The kitchen sessions became the center of Kong-min's day in a way that should have worried him, but somehow didn't. He started showing up at 4:15 on the dot, no longer pretending to be passing by or checking on something. He'd walk straight into the kitchen, pour himself coffee from the pot Adebimp always had ready, and sit at the counter while she worked. Some mornings she sang. Some mornings she just talked long, winding stories about her life that she delivered like she was narrating a movie only she could see. She told him about growing up in Houston's Third Ward with Nigerian parents who'd immigrated in the 70s and immediately decided that their daughter was going to be either a doctor or a lawyer. No other options available. I became a chef, she said, kneading dough with the heels of her hands. My mother didn't talk to me for 6 months. Then she tasted my egusi soup and decided maybe I hadn't completely ruined my life. She told him about meeting Emmanuel at a friend's wedding when she was 23, how he'd been the DJ and kept playing her requests all night until she finally went up to thank him and he'd said, "I was hoping you'd notice." How they'd gotten married 6 months later in a ceremony her mother had called recklessly fast, and her father had called very romantic, but also recklessly fast. "We had 19 good years," she said one morning, rolling out biscuit dough. "Then 2 terrible ones at the end. But the terrible ones don't erase the good ones, you know? People act like they do. Like if it ends badly, the whole thing was bad. That's not how love works." Kong Min listened to all of it while working through emails on his phone. Approving payments, denying requests, sending coded messages about shipments and territory disputes. The violence of his work felt less heavy when Adebimp was 3 feet away telling him about the time Emmanuel accidentally adopted 5 kittens because he couldn't say no to the girl at the pet store. "You ever been married?" she asked him one Thursday, 6 weeks into their arrangement. "No." "Ever been in love?" He thought about it. There'd been women, transactional relationships that served a purpose, occasional physical comfort that never went deeper than a night or 2. Nothing that qualified as love by any reasonable definition. "No," he said again. "Huh." She didn't sound judgmental, just curious. "That by choice or circumstance?" "Both." "Makes sense. Hard to love somebody when your phone rings at 5 a.m. with what I'm assuming are life or death situations." She slid a plate of fresh biscuits toward him, still steaming. "You ever want that? The love thing?" "I don't think about it." "That's not an answer, that's avoidance." "But fine, I'll leave it alone." She poured herself more coffee. "Emmanuel used to say I asked too many questions. I told him if he wanted a quiet woman, he should have married someone else. He said he didn't want someone else, he wanted me, questions and all." She said it casual, like she was talking about grocery lists, but Kong Min heard the weight underneath it. The kind of love that doesn't apologize for taking up space. His phone lit up with a call. Jean Su's name flashed across the screen. "Take it," Adebimp said, waving him toward the hallway. "I'm not going to stop cooking just because you have to go do your mysterious illegal business." He answered in the hallway. Jean Su's voice was tight with controlled panic. "We have a problem. The DA's office just issued warrants for 3 of our dock supervisors. Someone's talking." Kong Min's mind shifted into the cold, analytical space where he made decisions that kept people alive or got them killed. Pull everyone off the waterfront. Activate the secondary routes through Galveston. And find out who's talking. Already working on it. But Hyung, this is big. They're not going after low-level guys. They're building a case upward. Then we make sure there's nothing for them to build." He kept his voice quiet, aware that Adebimp was 15 feet away. "I'll be at the office by 7. Have everyone ready." He hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, letting his head clear. This was the reality. Warrants and investigations and the constant possibility of everything collapsing. The kitchen and Adebimp's singing were a reprieve, not a different life. When he walked back in, she was plating food, scrambled eggs with peppers, bacon, sliced mango, the biscuits from earlier. "Bad news?" she asked. "Work complications." "Uh-huh. The kind of complications that need a lawyer or the kind that need a shovel." She said it lightly, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that suggested she understood more than she let on. "The first kind. Hopefully. Well, eat something before you go deal with it. Can't negotiate or intimidate or do whatever it is you do on an empty stomach." She sat down across from him with her own plate. "My mama always said half the world's problems come from people making decisions, while they're hungry and tired. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Also exhausting. She calls me every Sunday to ask when I'm going to stop working for criminals and get a respectable job. I told her this pays twice what the pediatric surgeon paid, and the criminal is nicer to me. She was not impressed. Kong Min paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. She knows what I do. She's got a working internet connection and your name, baby. Took her about 45 seconds to find 3 articles about you and your alleged business interests. She wanted me to quit immediately. I told her I was fine. She said I have terrible judgment. I said that's rich coming from someone who married a man she met at a bus stop. Bimp grinned. We have this conversation every week. It's basically a tradition now. And you're not worried? About what? You shooting me? Please. You look like you're about to have a panic attack every time your phone rings. I'm not worried. She pointed her fork at him. Besides, I've lived through the worst thing that can happen to a person. Everything else is just weather. There it was again. That same philosophy she'd mentioned before. Violence as weather. Grief as the real disaster. His phone buzzed with another message from Jin-Soo. Updates, logistics, names of people who needed to disappear from the port of Houston before dawn. You need to go, Bimp said, not a question. Yes. Then go. I'll be here tomorrow morning, same time, probably making monkey bread, because I'm in that kind of mood. She started clearing plates. And Kong Min, whatever you're about to do, be smart about it. I just got this job. I'd like to keep it. He almost smiled. I'll try. You better do more than try. I have bills. She was already humming again, washing dishes, completely at ease in a house that most people entered with their shoulders tensed and their eyes down. Kong Min grabbed his phone and his keys and headed for the garage, his mind already 3 steps ahead. Who to call, what to move, how to protect the operation. But somewhere in the back of his head, underneath all the strategy, was the knowledge that he'd be back tomorrow morning at 4:15, sitting in that kitchen, listening to Bimp sing like the world was simple. The DA's investigation collapsed 3 weeks later when their key witness suddenly decided he'd remembered everything wrong and actually had nothing useful to say. Kong Min didn't ask Jin-Soo how they'd convinced the man to reconsider his testimony. He'd learned a long time ago that some questions were better left unasked. What mattered was the warrants disappeared. The dock supervisors went back to work, and the operation continued running smoothly through the port of Houston like it had for the last 8 years. Life returned to normal, or whatever qualified as normal when you ran a criminal empire out of a River Oaks mansion and spent your mornings in the kitchen with a woman who treated your felonies like background noise. Bimp never asked about the investigation. Never mentioned the 3 weeks where Kong Min had shown up to the kitchen looking progressively more exhausted, drinking his coffee in silence while she narrated her day like nothing was wrong. She just kept cooking and singing and telling him stories about Emmanuel that somehow always seemed to land exactly when he needed them. Like the morning after the witness recanted, when she told him about the time Emmanuel had gotten into a fistfight at a grocery store because someone had cut in front of an elderly woman in line. Broke his hand on the guy's jaw, she said, whisking eggs with her good arm while gesturing with the other. Had to wear a cast for 6 weeks. Couldn't work his DJ equipment. We almost lost the apartment because money got tight. And you know what he said when I asked if it was worth it? She paused for effect. He said, "Baby, some things you just gotta do because they're right, even when they're stupid." Kong Min looked up from his phone. Are you saying what I did was stupid? I'm saying you did what you thought you had to do, and now you're sitting here looking guilty about it. And I'm telling you that guilt is useless unless you plan to do something different next time. She poured the eggs into a hot pan. Which you won't, because this is who you are. So stop sitting in my kitchen looking like a sad puppy and drink your coffee. I don't look like a sad puppy. You absolutely do. Jin-Soo texted me yesterday asking if you were okay, because apparently you've been weird and distant. She said it casually, not looking at him. Kong Min's brain stuttered. Jin-Soo texted you? He got my number from HR. Wanted to know if you'd been eating, since I'm the one who feeds you. She plated the eggs, perfect as always, and slid them across to him. I told him you were fine, just stressed, and that he should mind his business. He said that's literally his job. I told him his job was keeping you alive, not monitoring your emotional state. We had a whole thing. You had a whole thing. With my second in command. He's nice. Very worried about you. Also very nosy, but I respect that. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him with that direct stare that still made him feel like she could see straight through to his spine. You got people who care about you, Kong Min. That's not nothing. His phone buzzed. A message from Jin Soo. Your chef is terrifying. I like her. Aid Bimp's phone buzzed a second later. She glanced at it and laughed. He just sent me a thumbs-up emoji. What is he, 12? He's 34 and the most efficient operations manager in the Southwest. And apparently he communicates like a middle schooler. Good to know. She took a sip of coffee, still grinning. So when do I get to meet the rest of your people? Or are you keeping me hidden like a secret wife? You're not a secret. You're just... He didn't know how to finish that sentence. What was she? His chef, technically. The person who'd somehow become the most stable part of his day. The woman who sang in his kitchen at dawn and made him feel like a human being instead of a collection of violent decisions. I'm just what? She raised an eyebrow, waiting. Important, he said, and immediately regretted how much truth was in that word. Aid Bimp's expression softened. Not in a pitying way. She never looked at him like she felt sorry for him, but in a way that suggested she'd heard what he meant underneath what he'd said. Well, she said quietly, you're important to me too, even if you are a criminal with terrible sleep habits and a lurking problem. They looked at each other across the counter, and something shifted in the air between them. Something that had been building for weeks, but neither of them had acknowledged because acknowledging it would make it real and complicated. His phone rang. Jin Soo again, actually calling this time. Hyung, we've got a situation at the Montrose warehouse. Someone tried to breach the south entrance. Security stopped them, but you should probably come see this. Kong Min stood up, his brain already shifting into crisis mode. On my way. He was halfway to the door when Aid Bimp called after him. Kong Min. He turned back. She was standing at the stove with her arms crossed, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Be careful, and come back tomorrow morning. I'm making my mama's banana fritters, and if you miss them, I'm going to be personally offended. I'll be here, he said. You better be. He left, and spent the next 6 hours dealing with the attempted breach, which turned out to be a competitor's crew testing their defenses, which turned into a very tense negotiation in a warehouse that smelled like motor oil and fear. By the time he got home, it was almost midnight. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. There was a plate on the counter, covered in foil, with a note in handwriting he recognized from the grocery lists Aid Bimp left for his house manager. Saved you dinner. Banana fritters are in the container by the microwave. Heat them for 30 seconds, no more or they get weird. See you at 4:15. Hey! Kong Min stood in his kitchen at midnight, holding a note from his chef, and realized he was in serious trouble. Not the legal kind. Not the kind Jin Soo could fix with logistics and bribes. The kind where a 46-year-old widow who sang gospel music and made banana fritters had somehow become the thing he looked forward to most in his entire complicated, violent life. He ate the dinner she'd saved him. Some kind of jollof rice with chicken that tasted like comfort food, even though he'd never had comfort food before. And went upstairs to his office where Jin Soo was waiting with security footage and risk assessments. But in the back of his mind, all he could think about was 4:15 a.m. and whether Aid Bimp would sing. His eye is on the sparrow again, and how much trouble he was in. So much trouble. The best kind. The trouble came on a Wednesday morning, 8 weeks into their routine, in the form of 3 armed men who bypassed Kong Min's security system at 3:45 a.m. and made it all the way to the kitchen before anyone noticed. Kong Min was upstairs in the shower when the alarms went silent, a specific kind of silence that meant someone had physically cut the backup power, which meant they knew exactly what they were doing. He was out of the shower and pulling on clothes when he heard the first gunshot, muffled by distance and expensive insulation, but unmistakably a gunshot. His brain went cold and strategic. Jinsu was across town. Security team was doing perimeter rounds. The panic button in his bedroom would bring backup in 4 minutes, maybe 5. The kitchen was downstairs. Bimp was downstairs. He grabbed the gun from his nightstand and moved. 20 minutes earlier, Bimp had been singing Stand By Me while prepping her mise en place for breakfast. Onions and peppers diced, eggs ready to crack, bacon laid out on the sheet pan. She'd gotten to the second verse when she heard the back door open, which was wrong because that door was always locked and nobody came through the back except the Saturday landscaping crew. She turned around and saw 3 men in dark clothes and ski masks walking into her kitchen like they owned it. Her first thought was, these idiots are about to mess up my workspace. Her second thought was, oh, this is about Kong Min. The one in front, big guy, moving like someone who'd done this before, pointed a gun at her and said, "Where's your boss?" Bimp looked at the gun, then at him, then at the other 2 men fanning out behind him like they were in an action movie. She was holding a chef's knife, which suddenly felt extremely inadequate. "He's upstairs," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Probably asleep. What do you want?" "We want him to understand he can't operate in our territory without consequences." The man said it like he was reading from a script. "You're gonna call him down here. Nice and calm. No alarms, no tricks. Or what? You shoot me in my own kitchen." She said it before she could stop herself, which was a bad habit Emmanuel had always warned her about. Her mouth moving faster than her common sense. The man stepped closer. "Yeah, exactly that. Well, that's just rude. I haven't even finished prepping breakfast." She set the knife down on the cutting board, moving slowly. "And for the record, it's not your kitchen. It's mine. I cook here 5 days a week." One of the other men laughed, a nervous sound that suggested maybe this wasn't going the way they'd planned. "Lady, shut up and call your boss." "Can't. He doesn't have a phone in his bedroom. Some security thing about signals being tracked." That was a complete lie, but they didn't know that. "If you want him, you're going to have to wait until he comes down, which won't be for another 30 minutes because the man finally learned how to sleep through the night, and I'll be damned if you're going to mess that up." The front man stared at her like he couldn't figure out if she was incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Bimp wasn't sure herself. "You understand we could kill you right now," he said. "I understand you could. But you won't, because I'm leverage and you're not idiots." "Well," she looked at their setup, the way they'd positioned themselves with their backs to the hallway. "You're not complete idiots. Though breaking into a crime lord's house with only 3 guys is pretty questionable judgment-wise." "For guys," the man corrected. "One's watching the perimeter." "Oh, well, 4. That makes it tactical genius." She crossed her arms. "You want coffee while we wait?" "I was about to make a pot anyway." The second man spoke up, his voice younger and higher than the first. "Is she serious right now?" "I'm absolutely serious. You're in my kitchen uninvited at 4 in the morning, and you're stressing me out, which means I need coffee. You might as well have some too, since you're going to be standing there looking menacing for a while." She moved toward the coffee maker, slow and deliberate, keeping her hands visible. None of them stopped her. They were clearly not used to hostages who offered refreshments. Bimp measured out coffee grounds, filled the reservoir with water, and hit the button. The machine gurgled to life, familiar and normal in a situation that was rapidly becoming surreal. "So," she said, leaning against the counter, "which one of Kong Min's competitors are you with? Because if you're the Galveston crew, I should tell you that ship sailed 3 weeks ago. He already handled that situation." The front man shifted his weight, gun still pointed at her, but with less conviction than before. "How do you know about Galveston?" "Baby, I work here. I hear things. Also, Jinsu talks too much when he's stressed, and he's always stressed." The coffee pot started dripping, filling the kitchen with the smell of dark roast. Is this about territory? Money? Revenge for something specific? Because if it's revenge, you should know that holding me hostage probably won't work the way you think it will. And why's that? Because I'm the chef. I'm staff. I'm not. She paused, realizing what she was about to say, realizing it was true. I'm not nothing to him, but I'm also not what you think I am. The third man, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. The boss said grab the girlfriend. You're the girlfriend, right? I'm 56 years old and I work for him. Do I look like somebody's girlfriend? You look like you're in his kitchen at 4 a.m. making him coffee. Bimp opened her mouth to argue and realized she didn't have a good counter for that. That's when the lights went out. Not the normal lights going out of a power failure. The sudden, deliberate darkness of someone cutting the breakers. The coffee maker died mid-brew. The refrigerator stopped humming. And then she heard Kong Min's voice from somewhere in the shadows, cold and controlled in a way she'd never heard before. You have 3 seconds to put your guns on the floor before I start shooting. What happened next happened fast. The front man spun toward Kong Min's voice. Bimp dropped to the floor behind the counter. Someone fired twice, the muzzle flash lighting up the kitchen like lightning. She heard bodies hitting the ground, heard swearing and scrambling, and the specific sound of someone's gun clattering across tile. Then the emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in dim red, and Bimp peeked over the counter to see Kong Min standing in the hallway entrance with his gun trained on the 3 intruders, all of whom were now on the ground in various states of injured or terrified. He looked like a completely different person. Not the quiet man who sat at her counter drinking coffee and listening to her stories. This was the man who ran a criminal empire, and it showed in every line of his body. Bimp, he said, not taking his eyes off the men on the floor. Are you hurt? No. I'm fine. I offered them coffee. You what? They were being rude and I stress bake, it's a whole thing. She stood up, brushing off her jeans. Also, I think I figured out they're from the Galveston crew, which I told you about 3 weeks ago, but nobody listens to me. One of the men on the floor groaned. Kong Min stepped closer, gun steady. Who sent you? The front man spat blood and said nothing. Let me rephrase, Kong Min said quietly. You broke into my house. You threatened my... He stopped, looked at Bimp, looked back at the man. You threatened someone important to me. I can make this quick, or I can make it educational. Your choice. Bimp had seen him stressed, tired, worried. She'd never seen him like this, dangerous in a way that made the temperature in the room drop. The front man must have seen it too because he started talking. By the time Jin-Soo arrived 6 minutes later with 4 security guys and a cleanup crew, Kong Min had the full story. Names, locations, who'd ordered the hit, how much they'd been paid. The intruders were zip-tied and sitting against the wall looking like they deeply regretted their career choices. Jin-Soo took one look at the scene, then at Bimp standing by the stove with her arms crossed, then at Kong Min still holding his gun. What happened? They tried to grab Bimp, Kong Min said flatly. Jin-Soo's expression went carefully blank. Is everyone? I'm fine, Bimp interrupted. Slightly annoyed that they interrupted my prep work, but fine. Also, someone needs to fix my coffee maker. It died mid-brew, and that's a tragedy. Jin-Soo looked at her like she'd grown a second head. You're worried about your coffee maker. I'm worried about a lot of things. The coffee maker is just the one I can control right now. She looked at Kong Min, really looked at him, seeing the adrenaline crash starting to hit. The way his hands were shaking just slightly even though his face was still cold and controlled. Can someone else handle the cleanup? Because I need to finish making breakfast, and I think your boss needs to sit down before he falls down. I'm fine, Kong Min said. You're not fine. You're having a delayed panic reaction, and you're about to crash hard. She walked over to him, gently took the gun from his hand, and passed it to Jin-Soo. Go deal with them. We'll be in the kitchen. Jin-Soo looked at Kong Min, waiting for confirmation. Kong Min nodded once, and Jin-Soo started barking orders at the security team. Aide Bimp took Kong Min's arm and steered him back into the kitchen, past the blood spatter she was very deliberately not looking at, and pushed him into a chair at the counter. "Sit," she said firmly. He sat. She went to the cabinet, pulled out the emergency bottle of bourbon she'd discovered 3 weeks ago, and poured 2 fingers into a glass. She set it in front of him. "Drink. It's 4:30 in the morning. And you just shot people in your own house to protect me, so drink the damn bourbon." He drank the bourbon. Aide Bimp poured herself a glass too, smaller, because she still had cooking to do, and leaned against the counter across from him. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her too. They sat in silence for a minute, drinking bourbon in a kitchen that still smelled like gunpowder and unfinished coffee. "You called me important," she said finally. "You are important. To the operation? To the household staff? Or to you?" She needed him to say it clearly, no hiding behind careful words. Kong Min set down his glass and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he'd been doing for 8 weeks from the shadows of her kitchen doorway. "To me," he said. "You're important to me. You," he stopped, searching for words. "You sing in my kitchen and I can sleep. You tell me stories about your husband, and I remember what it feels like to be human. You offered armed intruders coffee because you were stressed, and that's somehow the bravest and most ridiculous thing I've ever seen anyone do." Aide Bimp felt something crack open in her chest. The same thing that had been sealed shut since Emmanuel died. The part of her that had decided love was a thing she'd had once and would never risk again. "I think I might be falling in love with you," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "Which is terrible timing and also completely insane, but there it is." Kong Min stood up, walked around the counter, and stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see her reflection in his eyes, could count the seconds of his heartbeat in the pulse at his throat. "It's not insane," he said quietly. "It's definitely insane. You're a crime lord. I'm a widow who sings gospel music at 4 in the morning. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Probably." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "But I haven't slept properly in 4 years until you started singing in my kitchen. And when I thought those men might hurt you, he stopped, his jaw tight. "I would have killed all of them. Without hesitation. That's not strategy or business. That's what you mean to me." Aide Bimp's breath caught. She'd loved Emmanuel with her whole heart, loved him through sickness and death and grief. She'd thought that was it. One great love done, finished. But here was this quiet, dangerous man looking at her like she was the only solid thing in his entire world. And she felt something shift inside her like tectonic plates moving. "Emmanuel used to say that love doesn't replace love," she said softly. "It just makes more room." I didn't understand what he meant until right now. She reached up and took Kong Min's face in her hands, his skin warm, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before, and kissed him. It wasn't like kissing Emmanuel. It was its own thing entirely, gentle and fierce at the same time, tasting like bourbon and possibility, and the specific kind of courage it takes to let yourself love someone when you know exactly how much it can cost. When they broke apart, she was crying a little. So was he. "I'm still making banana fritters," she said, laughing through the tears. "And you're still sitting in my kitchen tomorrow morning at 4:15. "Wouldn't miss it," Kong Min said, and smiled. A real smile, probably the first genuine smile of his entire adult life. From the hallway, Jin-Su's voice called out, "Is it safe to come back in, or are you two having a moment?" "Go away, Jin-Su," Aide Bimp yelled back, not taking her eyes off Kong Min. "Is that a yes to the moment?" "Yes. Goodbye." She heard Jin-Su laughing as he walked away, heard the security team moving the intruders out through the side door, heard the house settling back into its normal rhythms. "So," Kong Min said, still holding her close, "what happens now?" "Now." Aide Bimp stepped back and surveyed her kitchen. The interrupted prep work, the dead coffee maker, the general chaos of the last 20 minutes. "Now I finish making breakfast. You help me clean up this mess, and then tomorrow we figure out the rest. One day at a time. just like everything else. One day at a time, he repeated, starting with breakfast. Because I don't care how many people you shot or how many criminal empires you run. Nobody skips the most important meal of the day in my kitchen. She turned back to the stove, pulled out a fresh pan, and started heating oil for the banana fritters she'd promised. And after a moment, Kong Min started helping, handing her ingredients, cleaning the cutting board, moving through the space like he'd been doing it his whole life. Somewhere in the house, Jin-Soo was coordinating security updates and disposal logistics. Somewhere in Houston, the sun was starting to think about rising. And in the kitchen, Abe Bimp started singing Stand By Me Again, picking up exactly where she'd left off before the interruption. Kong Min listened from 3 feet away instead of the shadows, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt like he'd finally come home.